They called it primitive. They called it outdated. But when I saw what it could do, I couldn't breathe. A weapon that doesn't need power, doesn't need charging, works in rain, snow, even the void of space, thought humans. We're foolish for keeping such a thing. Till I saw it tear through shields my people believed were unbreakable. And that's when I realized. We've made the biggest mistake in galactic history, the kind you don't survive. The alien commander Zareth had traveled across more star systems than he could count, yet Earth was unlike any world he had ever stepped upon. From orbit, it looked peaceful, vast oceans shimmering under sunlight, green continents stretching, like the pages of an untouched book. But Zareth knew better. He had not come here for beauty. He had come to study these humans, to see if the stories whispered in the darker corners of the galaxy were true. They called humanity unpredictable, dangerous, and yet strangely brilliant. The Galactic Council wanted a report. Zeroth intended to deliver one. His craft descended slowly toward a human military installation hidden deep in an expanse of forest, its metallic hull reflecting the pale morning light. The moment his landing gear touched the ground, he felt eyes on him, human eyes. Tall figures in strange patterned cloth stood waiting, their faces unreadable, their bodies still but alert. They had the stance of predators who were pretending not to be predators. The human commander, a broad-shouldered man with a calm but calculating stare, greeted him with a short nod. Zareth returned the gesture, though his long neck inclined more than a human's would. The air was different here, heavier, filled with scents his people did not know. There was the faint temps of oil, smoke, and something metallic. As he walked through the base, guided by soldiers who kept their distance, but never let their gaze wander, Zareth's eyes scanned everything: the dull green tents, the strange land vehicles with thick black wheels, the metallic boxes stacked in neat rows. He expected to see the glow of energy weapons, the sleek lines of plasma rifles, the hum of shield generators. Instead, he saw objects made of wood and metal, dull and solid, carried casually by the soldiers. They looked crude, primitive, almost absurd. The translator in his ear whispered a word in his own language. Riffle. Zareth slowed his pace, his large eyes narrowing. "What is that?" he asked quietly. One of the soldiers, a woman with a sharp smile, glanced at him and said, "An AK-47. Her tone carried no pride, no boast. Only a strange certainty, as if she were naming something inevitable. Zareth studied the weapon in her hands. It had no energy core, no heat vent, no shield bypass interface. It was, by all standards of galactic warfare, a relic from an age of barbarism. And yet, she held it like it was a living thing. The commander noticed his expression. "You'll see soon enough," the man said, his voice low and almost amused. The tour continued. Zareth passed rows of soldiers cleaning these weapons, sliding metal pieces into place, loading small brass cylinders into curved boxes. Every movement was practiced, smooth, almost ritualistic. He had read that humans valued tradition, but this was different. This was devotion. The alien's curiosity began to itch at the edges of his caution. Why would a race with access to modern galactic trade still use such crude tools? Even the porous fringe colonies in the spiral arm had long abandoned projectile weapons for cleaner, more efficient energy arms. There was no logical reason. Less logic was not the reason at all. They reached a wide-open field surrounded by low earth walls. The air smelled sharper here, laced with the scent of burned powder that clung stubbornly to the wind. A line of targets stood in the distance, metal plates, thick and armored. Zareth recognized the alloy immediately. In his world, it was used for starship hull plating. Even plasma fire struggled to eat through it without sustained focus. A group of soldiers stepped forward, their AK-47s slung across their chests. The commander gave a signal. The soldiers moved in perfect unison, raising the strange weapons to their shoulders. The first shot shattered the air. Zareth flinched instinctively, his ears ringing from the sharp crack that ripped through the morning. It was followed by another, and another, until the air was filled with a deafening, unrelenting storm. Each shot sent a small piece of metal faster than sound toward the targets. Xerath's vision caught the sparks as the slugs slammed into the armored plates, punching holes clean through. No energy pulse, no glowing plasma, just raw physical destruction. When the last shot faded, the silence was almost heavier than the noise had been. The targets were torn, twisted, some split in half. Xerath stepped closer, his long fingers brushing the jagged edges of the holes. They were ugly, brutal wounds in the metal, no neat burns, no clean cuts, just violent tearing. Impossible, he whispered. He had been trained his whole life to believe that energy shields and advanced alloys were the pinnacle of defense. Yet this weapon ignored all of that. It did not need to bypass shields. It was simply destroyed whatever stood in front of it. The human commander walked up beside him, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. "You see now?" said Xerath. Looked at him, still trying to form the right words. This is madness," he said at last. The commander's lips curled into a small smile. "No," he replied. "This is survival." Xerath felt a cold ripple pass through him. He could see it now, not in the weapon alone, but in the way the soldiers moved, the way they trusted it, the way they seemed almost intimate with it. This was not just technology. This was a bond between species and steel, forged through centuries of blood and necessity. As they left the range, Xerath's mind churned. He thought of the galaxy's elegant fleets, their clean, silent weapons, their precise, calculated warfare. And then he thought of noise, smoke, fire, and unstoppable shards of metal. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain. If these humans could turn something so old, so simple, into a weapon that could rip apart the strongest defenses in the galaxy, what else were they capable of? He glanced at the commander and saw that quiet confidence again. It was not arrogance. It was something deeper, something dangerous, something the rest of the galaxy had underestimated for far too long. And as the sun dipped lower in the Earth's sky, casting long shadows over the base, Xerath felt the uneasy truth settling in his mind. The Galactic Council had sent him here too. Assess a potential allure, a potential threat. Now, for the first time, he feared he already knew the answer. And it was not the one he wanted to give. The next morning, the sky above the base was a pale, cold blue, streaked with the thin white scars of human aircraft. Xerath had slept little, his mind restless with the images from the day before, the strange human rifles, the raw destruction they could unleash, and the unsettling calm with which their owners handled them. The Galactic Council had taught him to see weapons as tools of precision and efficiency, not noise and chaos. But here on Earth, the rules seemed different. Destruction was not a byproduct. It was the point. And now, the human commander had promised him something more. "You saw them fire at targets," the man had said last night. "Tomorrow, you'll see what they can really do." Xerath followed the commander across the base, toward a heavily guarded building. The air smelled faintly of oil and gunpowder. The scent stronger here, as if the walls themselves had absorbed years of it. Inside, the lighting was dim, broken by strips of harsh white along the ceiling. Soldiers stood along the walls, each cradling an AK-47, their posture straight, their eyes forward. They didn't glance at him. They didn't need to. Their attention was on the mission ahead. They emerged into a massive outdoor arena ringed by high walls of reinforced concrete. Xerath's eyes immediately went to the far end, where a row of tall, insect-like drones stood waiting. They were sleek, polished, and menacing, their hulls glimmering with the faint blue shimmer of active energy shields. Xerath recognized that this was cutting-edge defense technology, the same used by the Galactic Council's elite fleets. The shields could withstand sustained plasma fire, redirecting energy into harmless dispersion. Against the weapons of the galaxy, these drones were nearly invincible. Nearly, the commander gestured toward the waiting soldiers. "Watch closely," he said. No one moved for a heartbeat, and then the first soldier stepped forward. He was young, broad-shouldered, his face set in a mask of calm focus. Without a word, he lifted the AK-47 to his shoulder. There was no glow of charging capacitors, no whine of building energy. Just the click of metal, the tightening of muscle, and then the rifle barked a sharp, thunderous sound that tore through the air. Xerath flinched again, even though he had been expecting it. The bullet struck the first drone's shield, and for a heartbeat, nothing seemed to happen. Then the shield shimmered, flickered. It collapsed in a burst of blue sparks. The slug didn't stop. It punched straight into the drone's armor, tearing a jagged hole in its side. The machine staggered, its systems failing instantly, before collapsing to the ground in a smoking heap. More soldiers joined in, each one moving with the same mechanical precision, firing in bursts that shattered shields and shredded metal. Sound was deafening, hundreds of controlled explosions echoing across the arena. But there was a rhythm to it. It's a deadly music of steel and powder, as the air filled with the acrid scent of burning propellant. Drones fell one by one, their advanced defenses proving useless against the sheer physical force of supersonic lead. Xerath found himself gripping his own arms tightly, his heart pounding. He had seen energy weapons fired in battle countless times. They were clean, almost sterile. You pulled a trigger, and light crossed the distance, and something exploded. But this was different. The bullets didn't just strike. They impacted, each one carrying a weight, a violence that you could feel in your bones. The weapons didn't just kill, they punished. When the last drone collapsed, the field was silent except for the faint clink of brass casings settling onto the concrete. Smoke drifted lazily from the rifle barrels, glowing faintly in the cold morning light. The commander stepped forward, his boots crunching over the spent casings. "Energy shields are designed to absorb and disperse energy," he said, his voice carrying across the arena. "Lasers, plasma, ion fire. They don't care about those," he pointed toward the shattered drones. "But a small piece of metal moving faster than sound? There's nothing for the shield to absorb. Just goes through." Xerath swallowed hard. His mind raced with the implications. In every corner of the galaxy, civilizations had built their defenses around stopping energy weapons. No one had prepared for this. No one had needed to, until now. Why? "Keep this weapon?" Xerath asked slowly. "You have access to advanced galactic technology. You could build better energy weapons than any I've seen. Why this?" The commander's eyes met his, and there was no humor there this time. "Because it works. Rain, snow, sand, vacuum. It doesn't matter. It works when energy cells fail, when shield generators overload, when supply lines are cut. It works when everything else stops working, and in war." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You don't need the most advanced weapon. You need the weapon that never stops." Xerath felt a cold weight settle in his chest. This wasn't about technology. This was about survival at any cost. These humans had looked at the entire galaxy's obsession with progress and chosen something else, not because they were ignorant, but because they understood something everyone else had forgotten. He turned his gaze back to the smoking wreckage of the drones. They were symbols of galactic pride, built to stand against the deadliest weapons known. They had fallen to a design that was centuries old. The more Xerath thought about it, the more he realized the danger wasn't in the weapon itself. It was in the minds of the people who had chosen it, and for the first time, he began to wonder not if the humans could win a war against the galaxy, but if the galaxy could survive a war against them. That night, long after the sun had sunk beneath the horizon and the base had grown quiet, Xerath sat alone in the small human quarters they had assigned him, the dim yellow light casting long shadows across the walls. Outside his window, the silhouettes of guards moved against the faint glow of floodlights. Their AK-47s slung casually over their shoulders like an extension of their bodies. The alien commander leaned forward in his chair, his long fingers steepled before him, his mind replaying the events of the day over and over again. He had come here expecting to find primitive tools and outdated thinking, but instead, he had seen a weapon tear through the most advanced shields the galaxy could produce. In his people's history, projectile weapons had been abandoned centuries ago, discarded as barbaric relics in favor of cleaner, more efficient energy arms. They were dangerous, unpredictable, difficult to control. And yet, as he had watched those drones fall today, he had felt the cold truth settling in his chest. Unpredictable was not always a weakness. Sometimes, it was the deadliest strength of all. Unable to let the thought go, Zareth requested access to human military archives. The commander granted it without hesitation, which only made Zareth more uneasy. If they were hiding something, they didn't seem to care who saw it. As the night deepened, Zareth scrolled through centuries of human history, grainy black and white images of soldiers in mud-filled trenches clutching rifles, dusty footage of desert battles where weapons roared and spat fire, chaotic street fighting where desperate men and women held their ground with nothing but these crude metal shooting machines. Again and again, he saw the same pattern: enemies with superior technology falling before relentless waves of humans, armed with what should have been obsolete tools. Empires that should have crushed them found themselves bleeding, retreating, and finally surrendering to an enemy that never stopped coming. Zareth's own mind, trained in the rigid doctrines of galactic warfare, struggled to comprehend it. Energy weapons were predictable. They required charging, cooling, delicate parts. That could fail. They were weapons for soldiers who followed rules. But these human rifles, they were for survivors. They could be dropped in mud, buried in snow, soaked in rain, and still roar back to life with the pull of a trigger. They didn't care about terrain, about conditions, about the environment, and their ammunition, simple metal slugs, could be made anywhere. From the most advanced factory to a hidden workshop in a cave. The more Zareth read, the more a strange unease began to coil. In his gut, he thought of his own people's fleets, sleek and perfect, but fragile in their perfection. He thought of the great powers of the galaxy, so confident in their shining weapons of light. And he thought of this crude, ugly thing in the hands of humans, unstoppable not because of its sophistication, but because of its refusal to die. He tried to convince himself that such weapons were dangerous only in the hands of those who lacked better options. But he had seen the look in the human soldier's eyes today, the calm, patient confidence of those who had chosen this path. And that was when the doubt truly began to grow. It was not just about the rifle. It was about what it represented. Humans were not bound by the galaxy's idea of progress. They did not discard something simply because something newer existed. They kept what worked, honed it, mastered it, until it became a part of them. Zareth could not think of a single other species in the galaxy that would make the same choice. Progress, for most, was a straight line, always forward, never back. But for humans, progress was whatever kept them alive. That was a kind of thinking he had been taught to dismiss as primitive. Now he wasn't so sure. He pushed away from the desk, pacing the small room. His mind returned to the way those drones had fallen, their shimmering shields collapsing under the impact of raw physical force. In all his years, he had never seen a defense system fail so completely, so quickly. Humans could do that too. Council-grade drones? What could they do to warships? To planetary fortresses? His people had built their entire security on the assumption that energy shields were unbreakable. That assumption had just been shattered in front of his eyes. A soft chime from the door pulled him from his thoughts. It slid open to reveal the female soldier he had seen earlier, the one with the sharp smile who had first named the AK-47 for him. She leaned casually against the frame, the rifle hanging from its strap at her side. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. Zareth shook his head slowly. "I am thinking." She stepped into the room, glancing at the glowing screen behind him. "Reading our history, huh? You see the pattern yet?" He hesitated, then nodded. "You win," he said simply. Her smile widened, though there was no joy in it, only something. "Harder? Not always?" but when we have to, we make sure it sticks. When she left, Zareth remained standing in the center of the room, the weight of her words pressing against him. Somewhere deep inside, the first seeds of fear had taken root. He had come to Earth to measure a potential ally or a possible threat. But now, with each passing hour, the lines between those two things blurred. He could no longer tell which answer was worse. And as the night stretched on, one question refused to leave his mind. These were the weapons humans kept in plain sight. What were the ones they didn't show him? The morning air was sharp and cold, carrying the faint scent of damp earth as Zareth followed the human commander across the training grounds. His long, jointed legs kept pace easily, but his mind was far from calm. The doubts that had kept him awake last night still clung to him like a shadow. He had seen the AK-47's raw power on the firing range, seen the drones fall under its merciless rhythm, but those had been still targets, controlled, predictable. In real combat, nothing was predictable, and Zareth wanted to see how this crude, ancient thing would fare when the chaos of battle truly erupted. The humans seemed eager to oblige. It led him into a vast open training arena bordered by reinforced blast walls. The ground here was a mix of dirt, rock, and scattered obstacles crates, broken metal plating, and the burnt-out shells of old vehicles. Across from where the soldiers now gathered, a set of heavy gates began to open with a deep mechanical groan. From behind them emerged a squad of combat drones unlike the stationary models Zareth had seen before. These machines moved with frightening speed, their insect-like limbs skittering over the uneven ground, their sleek armor shining under the pale morning sun. Even before they fully stepped into the arena, Zareth could see the familiar blue shimmer of their energy shields. He recognized the patterned military-grade adaptive shields. It's a kind that could adjust in real time to incoming threats. Against plasma rifles or ion cannons, they would be nearly impenetrable. His own people's fleets relied on them. Folded his arms, curious and skeptical in equal measure. "If they are as advanced as I think," he murmured, "this will be short." The commander only gave him a glance and a faint smirk, as though he knew something Zareth didn't. The whistle blew. In an instant, the human soldiers moved as one, rifles coming up in perfect synchronization. The first shots cracked through the air like a roll of thunder. Zareth flinched not from the sound, but from the speed of what followed. The bullets didn't just hit the shields. They slammed into them with a violence that the shimmering barriers weren't built to handle. A second later, the first drone's shield collapsed entirely. The next burst of fire chewed through its armor, ripping jagged holes through its sleek plating. The machine's legs buckled, and it went down hard, sparks sputtering from its exposed internals. The other drones adjusted, spreading out their mounted plasma cannons, lighting up the air with streaks of searing blue. Bolts of energy hissed past the soldiers, striking the ground with explosive force. Zareth expected the humans to scatter in panic, but they didn't. They shifted positions smoothly, using debris for cover, firing in short controlled bursts that kept the drones constantly on the defensive. The sound was relentless siege shot a hammer blow against the enemy. Another drone's shield failed under the pounding. And then another. Zareth found himself leaning forward, watching with something that was no longer skepticism. The way that humans fought was unlike the rigid, ordered formations of most galactic militaries. There was discipline, yes, but it was a living, breathing kind of discipline, flexible, adaptive, ruthless. They didn't try to overpower the drones in one massive strike. They picked them apart, breaking defenses piece by piece until the kill was inevitable. By the time the last drone collapsed in a smoking heap, the air was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Brass casings littered the ground, glinting in the sunlight. The soldiers began reloading almost automatically, hands moving with the kind of speed that only came from thousands of repetitions. The commander turned to Zareth, his voice steady. "You saw the difference?" Zareth nodded slowly. "Your weapons, they're not just tools." His gaze drifted over the soldiers, their rifles still warm in their hands. "They are extensions of your will." The commander's smirk deepened into something sharper. "That's the point. In battle, your weapon can't just be effective, it has to be something you trust with your life. This, we trust." Zareth didn't answer immediately. He was still staring at the smoking wrecks of the drones. Their shields had failed so quickly, far quicker than he would have believed if he hadn't seen it. The implications gnawed at him. Entire fleets in the galaxy were built on the assumption that energy shields were untouchable. Now, he knew he had seen that wasn't true. In the right hands, with the right weapon, the unbreakable could be broken. And if humans could do this in a controlled test, what would they be capable of in a real war where they weren't bound by rules, where desperation sharpened every decision? The thought unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. As they walked out of the arena, Zareth glanced once more at the field behind him. The image of those shattered shields and crippled drones burned itself into his mind. It was then he realized that what he had seen was not just a test, it was a warning, subtle, unspoken, but impossible to ignore. And though no one said it aloud, Zareth knew. The humans had wanted him to see this. The hours after the combat test were a haze for Zareth. His mind looping over every image he had seen, the flicker and collapse of once impenetrable shields, the smoking craters where drones had stood moments earlier, the unshakable calm of the humans as they reloaded their weapons without a word. Back in the commander's office, the air smelled faintly of coffee, that bitter human drink that clung to the walls and furniture. The room was filled with relics medals, photographs of soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in far-off battlefields, and a glass case holding an old weather-worn AK-47, its wooden stock darkened by age and use. Zareth's eyes lingered on it. Unlike the polished weapons the soldiers had carried today, this one bore the scars of countless years. Scratches and dents etched into its surface like memories. The commander followed his gaze. "That one's been through 3 wars," he said, stepping around the desk. "Different countries, different centuries. Still works." He opened the case and lifted the rifle with a kind of reverence. "We've made a lot of weapons over the years. Plasma rifles, railguns, things that look good on recruitment posters. But when it comes to staying alive," he tapped the side of the rifle lightly. "This is the one we keep close." Zareth tilted his head, his large black eyes unblinking. "You could produce energy weapons that surpass anything in the galaxy," he said. "Why cling to this old design? Is inefficient, crude." The commander gave a short, humorless laugh. "Crude works when fancy fails." He leaned the rifle against the desk and sat down, gesturing for Zareth to join him. "Tell me, Commander, how do your ships fight?" Zareth blinked. "With precision, coordinated fleets, energy weapons calibrated for efficiency. Every system is maintained at optimal performance." "Exactly," the human said. "Perfect conditions. Controlled environments. Everything working just the way it's supposed." 2. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Now imagine something goes wrong. A solar flare knocks out your power grid. Shield generators overload. Your weapons need charging, but the cells are fried. What then?" Zareth hesitated. "We retreat." The commander smiled faintly, but it wasn't the smile of a man. Enjoying a victory, it was the smile of someone who knew something uncomfortable. "We don't retreat, we adapt. This rifle doesn't need power cells, doesn't need perfect conditions. It works in the desert, in the jungle, underwater, in the freezing dark of space. You can bury it for years, dig it up, clean it, and it'll still fire." He sat back, letting the words sink in. "We've seen weapons fail before, energy weapons. Advanced systems. They're only as good as the infrastructure keeping them alive. But this," he tapped the rifle again, "this will keep working long after everything else is dead." Zareth found himself thinking of the records he had read last night. The grainy images of humans fighting in mud and ruins. They had not always been the stronger force, but they had always been the last ones standing. "You keep it. It's insurance," he said slowly. The commander's expression shifted something. Colder crept into his eyes. "Not insurance. A reminder?" Zareth frowned. "Of what?" "That no matter how far you advance, you never throw away the things that work. And sometimes," he leaned forward again, his voice a low growl, "sometimes the simplest weapons are the ones your enemies can't stop. The words sent a ripple of unease through Zeroth. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't even pride. It was certain to born not from theory, but from experience. These humans had been tested in ways that galaxy's great powers never had, and they had learned a lesson the others had forgotten. Complexity fails. Simplicity survives. For the first time, Zareth began to understand the depth of what he was dealing with. The AK-47 was not just a weapon, it was a philosophy, a reflection of humanity's refusal to die even when logic said they should, and that, more than the bullets it fired, was what made it dangerous. The commander broke the silence. "You came here to see if we're worth trusting," he said, "but trust goes both ways. We're showing you this because we want you to. Understand? If the galaxy ever collapses, if the lights go out and the fleets are gone, we'll still be here, and we'll still be armed." Zareth felt the weight of those words pressing down on him. He could see it now, not just as an observer, but as someone standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous. The humans weren't keeping this weapon out of nostalgia or stubbornness. They were keeping it because they knew someday the galaxy might need it, or worse, someday they might use it. That night, a steady rain fell over the base, tapping against the window of Zareth's quarters in an irregular rhythm. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out into the dark as the lights of the guard posts shimmered faintly through the mist. The commander's words from earlier refused to leave his mind. "We'll still be here, and we'll still be armed." There had been something in that tone, something that wasn't bravado, that made him believe it. And the more he thought about it, the more he needed to know why. Unable to contain the itch in his thoughts, Zeroth requested more access to the human archives. Specifically, historical military incidents involving weapon failure. Request was granted almost too easily. Within the hour, his datapad filled with records stretching back centuries, compiled into blunt, unpolished reports. There was nothing theatrical in the language, no embellishment, just facts. One report in particular caught his attention. Date was hundreds of years before humanity's first contact with the wider galaxy. The file described a war fought during a period of high solar activity. Zeroth's eyes widened as he read massive solar storms erupted, flooding planetary systems with radiation. Energy grids collapsed. Shield generators failed. Communications blacked out for weeks. The armies of an entire human nation dependent on energy-based weapons found themselves helpless when their systems fried. But in scattered pockets across the front lines, units armed with AK-47s and other projectile rifles kept fighting. With no reliance on power cells or energy capacitors, their weapons were immune to the storm's effects. They didn't just survive, they won. Zeroth read on, the details growing darker. In the aftermath, opposing forces with superior technology had been routed, not because the humans outnumbered them, but because the humans' weapons simply worked when nothing else did. And there, at the bottom of the report, a line from a human general stood out in stark simplicity. "The future is never guaranteed. You keep what works, because one day, it's all you'll have left." The alien commander sat back slowly, his long fingers curling against the table's edge. Could feel the implications spreading like cracks through the polished certainty he had carried his whole life. The galaxy had grown soft, trusting in its technology, in its perfect, endless infrastructure. It had been centuries since anyone truly planned for complete system collapse. And yet, here were the humans, preparing for it as if it were inevitable. As the rain outside intensified, he opened more files. Similar patterns emerged. Power failures in Arctic expeditions where energy rifles froze solid, yet AK-47s kept firing. Jungle conflicts where plasma weapons clogged and overheated. But these crude rifles spat fire without pause. Deep space incidents where laser systems misaligned after micrometeorite strikes. But ballistic weapons worked exactly as they had on the first day. Over and over again in every environment imaginable, the same truth appeared. These weapons did not care about conditions, and the people who wielded them knew it. It was no accident. It was a doctrine. Zareth's chest tightened. This wasn't simply a matter of tradition or stubbornness. This was the result of a species that had lived on the edge of extinction for most of its history, and had learned never to trust the luxuries of progress. The commander's words from earlier returned, heavier now. Sometimes the simplest weapons are the ones your enemies can't stop. He imagined a galactic war, unlike any fought in living memory. Not the clean, calculated fleet battles fought under stable conditions, but a war where infrastructure burned, power grids failed, and the sky itself turned hostile. Imagined the fleets of the Council, his own people among them, falling silent as their weapons went dead, and the humans still standing there, rifles in hand, as relentless as the storms themselves. A soft knock broke his thoughts. The door opened, and the same female soldier he had spoken to before stepped inside, her uniform damp from the rain, her rifle slung lazily over one shoulder. She glanced at the datapad in his hands and gave him that sharp, knowing smile again. "You found it, didn't you?" Zareth's voice was quiet. "Found. What?" She stepped closer, leaning her hip against the desk. "The reason we don't let go of the old ways? We've seen the galaxy forget. We won't." Her gaze shifted to the rain-smeared window, and when it happens again, we'll be ready. Zareth followed her eyes to the darkness beyond the glass. There was something chilling in her certainty, something that told him this was not just a precaution. This was a plan. A quiet, patient plan built over generations, and for the first time, he began to think the humans weren't just preparing. For disaster, they were expecting it. The transport ship drifted silently in low orbit, its massive hull gleaming under the cold light of the nearby star. From the outside, it looked like any other human supply, vessel functional, unremarkable, a piece of moving metal in an endless void. But inside its cargo bay, a test was about to take place. One that Zareth could barely believe was necessary. He floated in the microgravity chamber, his limbs moving awkwardly, every gesture slowed by the lack of weight. Around him, a handful of humans moved with practiced ease, their bodies adapted to the drifting environment. They wore light training suits, but each one carried a weapon across their chests, sleek rifles. Yes, but also the same old AK-47s he had seen before. The reddish-brown of the wooden stocks stood out against the metallic walls, almost defiant in their simplicity. At the far end of the bay, the female soldier, her name now known to him as Lieutenant Mara, was strapping herself into a harness. "Ever fired a weapon in zero gravity?" she asked, tightening the straps with quick, sure hands. "No," Zareth admitted, his voice slightly distorted by the cum unit in his helmet. "Energy weapons are stabilized. There is no recoil in our designs." Her smile widened, though her eyes remained focused on her work. "Then you're in for a surprise." Without warning, she pulled the rifle to her shoulder and fired. The sound was muted in the thin atmosphere of the bay, but the recoil was immediate and forceful, sending her body drifting backward in the harness. Tiny shell casings spun away, glinting in the light before floating lazily through the air. Zareth's eyes tracked them, fascinated. "Do you know what happens to most energy weapons in space?" Mara continued, ejecting the empty magazine and sliding in another with a practiced flick. "They need cooling systems, batteries. They need perfect alignment for the beam to work up here. Heat builds, circuits shift, and one bad micrometeor strike can ruin your shot forever." She aimed again, squeezing the trigger in controlled bursts. Each round flew through the air with silent, deadly speed, striking targets on the far wall that burst into clouds of shredded material. "But this," she said, patting the wooden stock, "it doesn't care. It's gravity, no gravity, hot, cold, doesn't matter. It's fire and metal. As long as I can pull the trigger, it works." Zareth drifted closer to inspect the targets. Each one had been armored plating similar to the standard protective layers used by Council soldiers. The holes left by the bullets were clean and brutal, the metal peeled back like torn fabric. He turned back to her slowly. "Your enemies. They wouldn't expect this." "They never do," she replied. "They think war is clean now, predictable. But space isn't predictable, and neither are we." A quiet tension filled the room as the others began their own firing drills. Muzzle flashes lit the dim bay in staccato bursts, brass casings spinning through the air like golden snow. In that strange, weightless ballet, Zareth felt something stirred deep within, a realization that chilled him to his core. These humans weren't clinging to the past out of stubborn pride. They were building a weapon doctrine that could survive the collapse of everything else. No matter what happened, no matter how many systems failed, how many fleets burned, how many planets went dark, they would still be able to fight. And in the silence that followed, with the acrid smell of burnt gunpowder hanging in the air, Zareth finally understood the most dangerous thing about humanity's stupid weapon. It wasn't that it worked anywhere, it was that it worked everywhere. The war game was not supposed to be real. That was the agreement, the safety line. The comforting fiction that let alien delegates sit in the observation deck without fear. No one would actually die today. No worlds would burn. It was all a controlled simulation, fleet maneuvers, target exercises, and weapon trials conducted on the uninhabited surface of VRYNN-12. The grand viewing chamber was a cathedral of glass and steel. Rows of alien officials from dozens of species sat in curving tiers, their eyes and sensory organs locked on the massive holographic display that dominated the front wall. The screen showed the dusty, barren landscape of the test site, and in the middle of it, the human detachment stood waiting. Zareth sat among them, his hands clasped tightly together. He had seen enough in the past weeks to know that simulation was just a polite word. The humans weren't here to play games. They were here to make a point. The alien fleets began first. Precision laser strikes lanced from orbit, cutting glowing scars into the planet's crust. Shielded drones swept low over the surface, their energy cannons hammering away at pre-built enemy fortifications. The crowd murmured approvingly as the digital markers on the screen updated clean. Efficient, the kind of warfare the Council celebrated. Then it was humanity's turn. The display zoomed in, revealing a squad of soldiers moving across the wasteland with strange, almost lazy confidence. They carried their mix of sleek rifles and those same battered AK-47s. The wooden stocks scratched, the barrels darkened from long use. A tall, broad-shouldered man in front gave a hand signal, and the squad fanned out, taking cover behind jagged rocks. The enemy drones descended, their shimmering shields deflecting the first bursts from human laser rifles. It was a familiar sight to the alien audience beam, weapons failing to breach modern shields. Whispers of smugness rippled through the observation deck. Then the humans switched weapons. The deep, guttural roar of automatic fire filled the chamber's speakers. Spent casings exploded from the rifles in glittering streams, tumbling to the ground in chaotic arcs. The bullets didn't burn through shields. They didn't try to. They hit with raw physical force kinetic impacts that shoved the shield barriers inward, distorting them like rippling water. And then they broke. One drone spiraled into the dirt, its engines coughing black smoke. Another tried to climb, but a burst of hot lead shattered its wing struts, sending it spinning. The alien delegates sat frozen, watching the old human weapons tear through the supposedly invincible defenses as if they were made of paper. Mara's voice came through the coms, sharp and cold. Target the generators. No shields, no problem. Team moved like predators now, each burst of gunfire perfectly aimed, each kill swift and final. They didn't waste shots. They didn't hesitate. Within minutes, the field was littered with smoking wreckage. The crowd in the observation deck was utterly silent. When the last drone fell, the human squad didn't celebrate. They just reloaded, scanned the horizon, and waited for the next target. Zareth looked around the chamber and saw what no one wanted to admit: the dawning fear in the eyes of seasoned warlords. The quiet shifting of nervous ambassadors in their seats. Humanity hadn't just won the exercise. It'd rewritten the rules. And deep down, everyone knew. In a real war, this was exactly how it would happen. Quick, brutal, unstoppable. The council leader finally broke the silence. What, exactly, are those weapons? Mara looked straight into the camera, the faintest smile touching her lips. Stupid ones, she said. The kind you can't stop.